Welcome.
So this is my talk, and it's a talk about how to make your space at any conference you're showing at, festival, whatever, unique so that people will approach it. How many people have shown at a conference here, a festival, biennale, whatever? Okay, great. So why am I qualified to give this talk? People think I'm a funny person. Jay testified to that. I have a degree from a university. And then additionally, I've shown video games at locations before. So getting into it, typically when you show up at a festival as a guest, you'll just see this sort of sea of laptops and screens with the pedestal underneath them, a lot like what you're seeing right here. It's kind of just a sea of assimilated spaces, and you can't really navigate what you want to play and what you don't want to play. So something I try to do when I'm showing at a space is finding a way to make it look unique in the area. And I'll sort of immediately go into a design philosophy that Disney uses. I don't necessarily agree with them as a company, but they have a lot of good ideas on how to show off and how to wayfind in their areas. So this is a photo of my parents, but the important thing is this castle. My parents are important to me, but the castle is important in this photo. So if you look at any well-designed theme park, you'll notice it has a castle. In the industry, the castles or the sort of areas of interest that you can see from any point of the park are typically referred to as weenies. That's something that it's a term Walt Disney came up with to describe cold hot dogs that he would typically eat and ruin his dinner with. It's still a term that's around today. I'm not necessarily sure why. I guess it's maybe to pay homage to him. However, I try to emulate that. You know, you want to be the weenie whenever you're showing in a public space. I think Robin Baumgartner is very good at being the weenie in a lot of spaces. If you look at Line Wobbler, it's large, it always is everywhere. You can see it from any location. I don't have any photos of it because I don't have internet access here, but I remember at the Tokyo Game Show, you could see it from any part of the showroom floor. Everyone was attracted to it, and I remember it won the audience award that year, and I think a really large part of it had to do with how visible it was from any point of that room. So here's a photo of a game my game design partner and I made a few years ago called You Must Be 18 or Older to Enter. And something we try to do with this game is whenever we're showing it somewhere, we'll buy a lot of items from thrift stores. And in this photo, a lot of the artifacts you'll see here were things we just asked places we were showing at if they had just extra chairs or pictures or anything lying around. Typically hotels have these overstuffed chairs, or they have things that are really antiquated that they don't use anymore. And a lot of these conferences and festivals are held at hotels now, so it always kind of worked in our advantage, to our advantage. And the desks were actually, for this one, was provided by Slam Dance, which is where we were showing in Park City. This is another example of it. This was at Game Jolt's party at GDC this past year, and where we purchased all of this stuff was actually at Goodwill's in San Francisco. And I know purchasing things on location can seem prohibitively expensive, but if you find the right thrift stores, you can buy things for very, very cheap. This desk that you see that the monitor was on was, I think, like $10, $5, and the monitor itself was something we've been carrying on airplanes. So if you really start trying to curate a space to the theme of your game, you can get clever with how you're carrying things, but you always have to be cognizant of how they might get damaged in transport. I'm just going to sort of start going through a survey of photos I put in here, because whenever I go to these thrift stores, I get really inspired by a lot of the items I find. Jay, you might like this chair. This chair would be really good for Hypnospace. It has a bit of a 90s vibe if you wanted people to sit down somewhere. I guess this little sailor boy might be nice for something like Cuphead. You know, who knows? I don't know what this cat would be good for. Maybe if you were like making a game about a cat that did lines of Coke or something. I don't know what you would do with this one, but it was something I found at a thrift store and bought for like $2, and now it's in our house. The Santa looked pretty cool as well, because the kids look terrified of him as much as he looks terrified of just existing. This is a cool little one. This is just a pile of junk that is right by the river that I live next to, the LA River. And it's like a communal junk swap where you just go down and give a piece and take a piece, which I've done several times, really to no use. I think I may have used a couple pieces in the 18 or older display a few times because there's just a lot of odds and ends in there. This is kind of a fun photo. My roommates and I are kind of hoarders of anthropomorphic objects now. I'm not totally sure why that is, but a lot of these were thrift store finds. And it's hard to really say what half of them are. But, you know, it's things you could ultimately find a way to involve into your displays if you ended up making a game and had the space to store them. I feel like a lot of conferences are accommodating to you if you just email them ahead of time and are like, hey, I'm bringing a huge red suit on a stand. As long as they know you're doing this stuff, they won't really question what you're doing when you show up. The same thing I've noticed goes with like load-in rules. A lot of them have load-in rules where they're like, you need to use access elevators, you need to use this and that, but if you kind of just walk straight through and act like you have a purpose, no one really questions you. That happened at South by Southwest. They really didn't want us moving furniture through their floor, but if you just do it, no one really seems to stop you. So that's something to be cognizant of. I don't really know if it's much of a tip as much as it is just telling you how to skirt around rules of spaces. Something else you can do that works really well if you are strapped for cash and don't want to like make business cards and handouts that are going to be like prohibitively expensive as well, to try to stand out, is you can just make your own. Of course, it's time consuming, but it's something that I think ultimately people enjoy to take home with them. The idea that we started doing this, at least my game design partner and I started doing this, was because one of our friends forgot to bring business cards to GDC, I believe it was. So he just started ripping up pieces, like any piece of paper he could find, and just writing his information down on it. And people seemed to love it for some reason. So we kind of decided to start emulating that on a more, I'd like to think a more professional scale, but ultimately it still has that kind of DIY feel to it. I guess kind of the summary of this is, you know, make noise in a way that you feel is constructive and helpful to your game, but try to do it in places where other people that have listened to this talk aren't going to be, because then you're just going to drown each other out. This also really works well with mostly just digital games, because physical games always are attracting crowds when people are screaming and running around. We've shown physical games, and those are always big attractions for people. Definitely try to find a way to be unique, and those conferences are always going to they're always going to have good wayfinding. You just need to find a way to make your pedestal, your space, represent you even when you aren't around.